You may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Groups of people will be required to designate a spokesperson to represent them before council, who may speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. Citizens must use the microphone at the speaker stand, clearly state name and address for the record, and keep comments brief and to the point. Please spell the name for the record, and note that we do not take minutes for committee meetings. Will there be any decisions tonight? Those are just informational meetings. So is there anyone coming to speak? Please. Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm Sue McInerney. I live at, let me spell first, McInerney. I live at 105 Bevington Road, and I've been a resident of Forest Hills for 22 years. I'm a member of the Forest Hills Democratic Committee, and I'd like to say a few words about the use of the community room. But before I do, I'd like to represent our members who are with me tonight. Lori Sisson, of course, is chair, and you know her. Kathy Nelson, representing District 4. Beth Reinhardt, representing Wrench. I'm sorry, it was an R. I didn't use my cheat sheet, forgive me. District 5. Robert Beach, District 8. Our secretary, Jim Roberts, and Doug Rischel, our treasurer.
Would you please speak into the microphone? It's just,
I'm sorry.
it's lost.
We also have people, council members on.
Okay, forgive me. Okay,
Thank you.
I will stay on the microphone. And I represent District 6. You have already heard from our chair, Lori, and also from Kathy Nelson, another committee member in the last 2 meetings. So you know our position on the use of the community room. Tonight, I have a few points to make and some questions to ask. First, why were we so suddenly kicked out of the community room, being given only 2 days' notice? What happened to precipitate this? And why haven't we been told? All of the behind-the-scene conversation and uncertainty has led to confusion and mistrust. Maybe if there had been some conversation, explanation, and transparency, we wouldn't be where we are now. And on the issue of transparency and conversation, I was at the most recent council meeting on June 19th, and I was a bit surprised to see the way 2 other issues were handled. Why did the people of Fairfax Road, who have been asking for speed bumps for some time, have to guess that something may be happening because they saw markers on their street? What's the big secret? Why couldn't something have been communicated to them? And on the other issue, there were resolutions to change the provisions of several of the committees. Now, of course, that is your prerogative. But when the committee members asked for a little more time for review, they were told no. Why would people want to volunteer for these committees if they feel their voices aren't heard? Finally, we've heard that alternative locations have been discussed for our Democratic Committee meetings. But again, nothing official has been discussed with Lori, our chair. When is a decision going to be made? We need to know. I think you all agree that this is a consequential election year, and we need to be rallying voters in Forest Hills and in neighboring communities where there is little active community work going on. Lori's time should not be spent trying to figure out where we're going to meet and then having to inform the candidates and their reps. We need to get back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we will move forward with planning and zoning. Mr. DeCosta?
Yeah, Mr. Abrams, do you have any report for planning and zoning this week?
The only thing that I actually have is I did meet with the planning commission to discuss the changes that were in the ordinance, and they have no qualms and are ready to move forward if council's ready.
Thank you for doing that. As I mentioned, I plan on attending the next official planning committee meeting this month, so make more connections. I have nothing else to report, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. DeCosta. We will move on to Finance? Do we have Mr. Erbaldinger on? Or Cecil Watkins?
Watkins is on. Can you hear us, Cecil?
Mr. Watkins, are you?
Hello.
Report?
Yes, I'm here. I have not had the opportunity of downloading the finance report. I thought that Marcus would be there.
Would it be okay if Mr. Abram proceeds then?
Yes, please.
Okay, for the manager's update.
Yeah, it does.
He does.
Do you have your hand raised, Marcus?
Yep, that's
Okay.
why Marcus is as an attendee. Hold on.
Get this done, Pat, yet. We've just had more people calling in than we do for usually. Okay.
Marcus, you should be moving over to panelist in a moment and be able to speak. You should be good to go, Marcus.
Mr.
Can you hear me?
Erbaldinger? Yes, we can
Yeah,
hear
I think
you.
wrong link. I don't know. It shouldn't be so complicated, but now I'm
You're
here.
live now.
Okay, thank you. I don't know. Anyway, I don't think it's effective to chair a meeting. So Cecil, can someone else do finance? Because I think I can't see anyone, and I don't think it's effective to share a meeting if I'm on a phone.
Well, then will it be okay if Mr. Abrams
Yeah,
proceeds for
fine with that.
both of you?
Yeah.
Oh, here's Cecil.
But he's in the car too.
I'm on the phone also. So, and I haven't had the opportunity to download the finance materials. I didn't know that
Oh,
I'd have
yeah,
to give
that's
that
correct.
report.
No, the
Okay, it's
manager
Mr.
should proceed.
Abrams.
I can
Yep.
see the agenda.
I'll take care of it, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
So for the manager's update, I did, as previously discussed, move some funds around within our accounts to take advantage of better rates of return. Did that actually on the last day of June, so we'll start to see those results at the end of July. Other pieces that had been discussed and asked for were updates on the pool revenues for the year. Overall admissions are up by about $13,000 over 2023, and they are just under $3,000 from meeting the total budget. At this point, I don't anticipate any more season passes, so to meet the budget, it'll have to be people coming in on daily passes. And overall, the revenues are up by about 22,000 from 2023 year to date. Total expenses, on the other hand, are $4,000 over 2023 year to date, significantly under budget for the year at this point. That will level out as we work through the remainder of wages and benefits that are going to be carrying out throughout the year. So it's a snapshot, but it is not really a valid picture of the whole. The only piece that I see on committee business is the Siemens invoice, which actually was not attached for council members. But in reviewing it and with some of the issues that we've had with the air conditioning at the lodge, I am recommending that at this point, council hold on signing off on this payment until Siemens comes to us with an actual solution for the work that was already done at the lodge that was insufficient. So in talking with the folks at Siemens, we should have an answer next week, at which point we might still be able to approve it in our normal timely fashion.
I agree with that. We should withhold it. I think we should even wait until they fixed it, which they won't be able to fix in a week.
Mr. Bacon has his hand up.
If we can go into detail on that a little bit, is this the ventilation shaft issue, or is this or is this the undersized air conditioning of the pool lodge concern?
It's a little bit of the ventilation. Mr. Reamer was meeting with folks from Siemens today and discussing why the ventilation can't be run all the time in there just exhausting out through the roof. But primarily it is Siemens' acknowledgement that the units that they put in are extremely undersized. So it is incumbent upon them to resolve that to satisfaction.
Thank you.
Else? Sorry, do we have a timeline for that? Did they give you any kind of?
I'm actually our project manager's actually in town this week, so I met with him yesterday and he was on site at the pool today. He told me, working through their mechanical contractors, we should have an answer next week, which is why
Okay.
I'm hopeful that we can continue to move forward with their payments if they have a responsible answer for us.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments? Favor of that as well?
Includes the finance report.
Mr. Abrams? We go on to Committee of the Whole. The manager's update, please, Mr. Abrams.
I'd just like to remind council members, if you haven't, try and schedule some time with Greg from Consensus to switch your emails over to the .gov. Also, I had sent out, and I do have a copy here as well. We'd been talking about using the Turtle Creek Valley COG for code enforcement. We do have a contract from them, and for next week, I'm asking the council approve that contract so that we can move forward with bringing them on board. Mr. Erbaldinger does have his hand up.
Yeah, I have a quick question
Right
about
now.
the email thing. Do we have to call them or they will contact us? What do you have to do? I'm not totally sure about that.
You need to reach out to them for a time that's convenient for you.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you. Did anyone else have any questions? Then we'll move on to the solicitor's report. Mr. Corbel?
Madam President, two quick items now, and I think I'm also addressing the matter under the issues moved from other committees. First, the contract with Jordan has been finalized. They accepted all of our requested revisions. So Mr. Abrams, if you could place a motion on the agenda for next Wednesday to approve that agreement, I'll send it to you so you have the agreement and can share it with council. And that should be retroactive until February 1st of this year. That should include all the work that they've done for us to date. Second, I was asked to just talk about the veto process so we can have that arranged for the agenda as well. As everybody knows, the mayor vetoed the ordinances that were passed at the last council voting meeting with respect to the changes to the committee rules. So the way this should work is, or at least the way I think I would suggest that we consider doing it, is that we would put the veto matter at the top of the meeting like we would any sort of public hearing that we've had. At that point, President Martin, you would ask if there are any objections to entering the mayor's comments and objections with respect to those ordinances into the meeting minutes. That's required. And then secondly, council should at this meeting, although you could do it at the next meeting, you have to reconsider the ordinance, and that has to be voted on in a roll call vote. It has to be overturned. There needs to be 5 votes to do that. It's a majority plus 1. So, you know, there could be 4 or 5. I guess the mayor vetoed 4 ordinances, so there would be 4 separate motions. Roll call for each. That's where that is. I mean, and unless there's consensus moving forward that the other groups don't have comments like the planning commission, you know, if there is some sort of consensus in that regard, you could potentially do it as one motion, but it's probably best put together as 4 separate motions.
Just FYI, Angela's hand is up. Mr. Biocchi's hand is up.
Okay, Angelo, do you have a question about the veto process?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
Corbett.
go ahead. Yes.
My understanding, or from my reading of the state law regarding this, that the veto isn't effective until it's conveyed to council at the next council meeting. Is that correct?
The veto is effective because the mayor has already transmitted it to council via email. So, and even if it weren't effective until next Wednesday, I don't think that really has, and I'm not sure what you're driving at, but I don't think that matters at this point for purposes of handling the veto situation.
Yeah, not for the purpose of handling it, but just for the clarification of whether or not there was actually a veto in effect, or that didn't occur until it was actually conveyed in person at the next council meeting.
My view on that is that it's been communicated and transmitted to all members of council via electronic mail about 10 days ago or so. And that's sufficient to communicate the mayor's veto and puts you all on notice that you have to consider it at one of your next meetings.
Thank you.
Sure. So, any questions about that? Any other questions or concerns about that process?
I don't see anyone else's hand up. Okay,
That's all I have for my report tonight.
thank you, Mr. Corbel. Then we're moving on to the committee business report. We previously applied for a grant application for, I don't know, I can never pronounce this, Cook Park, Cottage Park, however you say it. And originally, when we asked for the grant, a resolution from council wasn't required, but we just received notice that now we do. So we will have that at the business meeting next week. Moving forward then, this issue is moved from ops and policy. Sorry, Mr. Erbeldinger, your hand is up, please. Mr. Erbeldinger, did you have a question?
Sorry, I was on mute. I thought we agreed during last week's committee meeting that we will address the community room tonight, but it's not on the agenda. I thought we will do it during.
Actually, it is. It's the next item up.
Oh, I'm sorry then. Yeah.
Did you have any other comment?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. So the first item from Ops and Policy was the resolution supporting a county ban on single-use plastics. Mr. Lawrence, is it okay if we move forward?
Sure, fine by me.
Is there any discussion on this? Any comment? Are we in favor of this so far? Then we'll
Yes.
have, Mr. Biocchi, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just to clarify, that is a non-binding resolution.
That's correct.
I mean, I would describe it as it's a statement of council. It does not create a law. It's just simply expressing council's opinion on the matter currently before county council.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm sorry, I can't get my hand to go up, but I think that we need to move towards sustainability, and I'm in favor of this non-binding resolution.
So is everyone in favor of having this on the business meeting next week?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Mr. Abrams, will you take care of that, please?
That will be on the agenda.
Thank you. Then moving forward, the community room use policy. Again, Mr. Lawrence, you indicated it last week that Mr. Corbel would be taking this. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is a little above my pay grade. So I'm turning it over to, I'm turning it over to
Mr.
him.
Corbel?
All right, thanks, everybody. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but the issue that exists with our current use policy as it relates to using rooms in this building is that it calls into question whether or not it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. and the PA constitutions. Municipalities can be liable under 42 USC 1983. You may have heard of the 1983 claims. If you violate an individual or a group's right to equal protection. And here, the policy itself, and I've expressed this in the past, the policy provides that the room is for the use of the borough primarily and the borough's committees, commissions, boards, etc. But that other groups can use the room if approved by council, which that's the problematic portion of the policy. When I was asked about it, that's the opinion that I expressed. So moving forward, in order to pass constitutional muster, because this doesn't include a suspect classification, meaning something like race or national origin, or even what's called a quasi-suspect category under the law, which would be other protected classifications such as gender, sexual orientation, etc. Those cases, if there was discrimination on who could use the room on that basis, we would face a very high burden. It would be called, it's not just a rationality test, it's a strict scrutiny analysis. It's very hard to overcome that. But that's not what we're dealing with here. There's not even First Amendment issues here. This is just a policy that allows you to pick the winners, if you will, to the exclusion of others. And so in order for that to pass constitutional muster, it's called the rational basis test. It's pretty easy to overcome that, but the policy needs to be more specific, in my view, as to who can and cannot use the borough facilities. So that's basically the legal background and what the issue is with the policy as it stands. I am aware that there has been some discussion, and if that's okay for me to go into that, about,
Yes, please.
using one of the lodges in lieu of the room over here, overflow room, etc. So that's been put out there. I think we can develop a policy that would permit that room to be used by certain groups at no charge, and would pass the rational basis test of both the US and PA Constitution. So in order for me to move in that direction from a policy preparation perspective, I need to make sure that there's enough support on Borough Council to move in that direction. And the lodges we're talking about is the Westinghouse and the Pool Lodge. At that point, unless somebody has a question for me, I will stand back and then you all can discuss.
Mr. DeCosta, you have your hand up.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is, given the current policy, we may want to consider using other spaces in the borough to support certain groups at no charge, but not the borough building.
Correct.
And for what reason? I didn't quite follow why we would exclude the borough building.
Now, I think the answer to that is for you all to decide. But I think if you read the policy as it exists and as it's written, it's pretty clear that that room is to be used by other groups on an occasional basis, et cetera. There's very high burdens. There's, if you're using it after hours, you need to give 45 days notice and things of that nature. So that was approved by Borough Council in 2018, I believe is the date. So that's been on the books. Has it been followed to a T?
Right.
No, I don't think so. Every single time. And that's another concern with respect to the legal analysis here. But anyway, moving forward, I think, whether it's here or elsewhere, I think you can develop a policy that would permit it, right? So under equal protection, you can allow everybody to rent the room. That passes constitutional muster. You can say nobody can use the room or rent the room. That also passes constitutional muster. If you're going to go in a middle ground, you just have to develop a group that can use it, that you can argue, and there's a rational basis as to why only this group or these groups are permitted and no one else. And I think we can get there.
And you can provide us with the test to make sure we're okay, thank you.
Mr. Erdeldinger, you have your hand up.
Yes. Steve, would it be okay if we have a policy to say any organization which benefits the citizens of Forest Hills? For example, swim team, parent, booster, board meeting, Boy Scouts, any political party committee. I think they're all benefiting the citizens of Forest Hills. Would that be, I don't think we want council to involve with every single decision. It should be up to the manager in my mind. And if the manager feels like it's above his pay grade, he could probably push it up to council. But it should be an easy policy, and council should not be involved in deciding who gets in and out.
That's what I'm suggesting. One of the ideas that I had, and this was based on citizens' commentary at the last meeting, was that, and this may be more narrow than you're thinking, Mr. Erdeldinger, but and we would allow the lodge spaces, et cetera, to be used by individuals that are elected and represent part or all of the borough of Forest Hills. I think there's a rational basis there. These are elected officials who are here to represent the citizens of Forest Hills in some capacity, whether it's a legislator or a political party, and they are, doing work for our residents. That makes sense. So, can that be expanded to perhaps other groups or agencies, perhaps? But I think we have to be very careful not to use extremely broad language, because then we're inviting somebody to come along and ask to use the room that may not be the question as to whether or not there's a benefit to the borough, or I think something along those lines that Marcus mentioned, that becomes subjective than objective in my view, or it has the potential to.
Mr. Bacon, second, I'd like to comment. What happened as soon as I became the president is I didn't want to have anything to do with who decides who gets in this building. But right away, I started getting phone calls from the staff because people were asking to use, for instance, the small conference room. Yes, they were a member of the Democratic Committee. They were a member of the Forest Hills Community Alliance, but they wanted to use the room for something totally unrelated. So why was I being called on it? The manager said, no, according to this 2018 document, which I knew nothing about at the time, and I don't think anyone else on council did, I was being asked to make decisions. The manager at that time, not Mr. Abrams, Mr. Morris said no, that this person wasn't permitted in there. So I agreed. I went along with it. And I started getting phone calls with other requests. So I asked Mr. Corbel to explain the legality of this, because I don't want to be in charge of who comes into the building, because then this kind of stuff happens. Had your hand up, Mr. Bacon?
I think it was ahead of Mr. Erdeldinger's hand, but if that's not correct.
I have my hand up too.
Okay.
Like I have a good example of something who should be admitted. Like for example, we have our newly formed Pride Committee of Forest Hills. That's clearly benefiting the citizens of Forest Hills. Like if they want to meet in the community room, they should be. That's like an example.
Mr. Evans, we couldn't understand which group you were mentioning. You said
What do you say?
we couldn't understand what you said. Would you mind repeating it?
I'm sorry. Like I have one good example of a committee or organization which should be allowed to meet in the community room, like our newly formed Pride Committee of Forest Hills. I think that's clearly benefiting the citizens of Forest Hills. Like that's what I think the community was designed for, people like that.
Actually, the Pride Committee, they have their meetings at homes and they're not requesting to come in here, but, and we haven't made a request to. Actually, I don't believe that they're a borough group.
What he's saying is that's a prime example of a Forest Hills-based committee that would be, or could use the room. He's not saying they made that request. What he's saying is that's an excellent example of a committee that should be able to use that room to convene and meet.
I see what you mean. Well, it's the same thing with like mentioning the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts meet at the church. They have a big shed there, the Presbyterian church. They came here one time because there was an election in that night where they typically meet. And yes, I said yes, that they could come in here because they do a lot of service for us. Again, the garden clubs, they don't meet here. They meet at their homes. They come once, I think the Garden Club of Forest Hills has a plant sale once a year, but they also have the right to come here, but choose not to, as well as the Late Bloomers Garden Club. Mr. Bacon, go ahead.
My question to Mr. Corbel may sort of cover these examples. Is there a standard accepted sort of definition like all official nonprofit organizations that sort of has an easy, clear definition that basically takes the burden off of us for, do they benefit Forest Hills?
Just we're clear as to what you mean by a nonprofit. Potential connotations, right? Are we talking 501c3s? Are we talking, some loosely affiliated group of folks, that just are here for an issue or a matter in their community? Like a lot of times you'll have groups that form to oppose a development, right? Remember the signs for Churchill, right? For the Amazon, etc. I think they had a group name for that organization, but I'm not so sure that they were a nonprofit organization, right? So we just have to be, thoughtful in how we use those words.
I was assuming that like 501c3 or one of those sorts of definitions is what I was aiming for there. Thank you.
Sir, there, did you still have more comments?
Yes. Like the examples you mentioned, even those organizations don't necessarily need they don't need the room, but they are like good examples where we can draft the policy around, like Garden Club, all those Boy Scouts. I'm not sure what their legal status is. So I'm a little bit hesitant to use like one of those official tax statuses to get into our meeting room. But the examples you mentioned, Garden Club, Late Bloomers, all those people should be allowed to go in if they want to. And I think we should write our policy around them. Not sure what their tax status is. I'm a little bit hesitant about putting it on a tax status.
Mr. B, your hand is up.
You calling on me?
You have your hand up, Mr. Bioki?
Yeah, your mic was a little garbled, I'm sorry. I think what we're doing here is we're conflating a lot of these different organizations. The from what I've seen, and I've read a lot of material regarding municipal buildings and how some of those are structured. Some municipal buildings are structured where they have meeting rooms that are strictly for municipal business, and they also have rental space. Our building was not designed for rental space. It was designed as a meeting room. The room that's being referred to as the community room was so designated by the architect and not necessarily by design. It's really the council annex or the council overflow room. So where there is no rental space, the only business that takes place in those rooms, even the little conference room, are council business or business by appointed boards and committees of council. And so I think the cleanest thing is that we have a space at the Westinghouse Lodge, we have space at the Forest Hills Pool that is available for groups to use. And I think that gets us away from all of these complications and bending over backwards and trying to make sure we cover every possible contingency that might arise. And I think, to me, that it makes the most sense.
Thank you, Mr. Bioki. Mr. Erbaldinger, is your hand up again?
Yes, sorry. I was there when we designed the building and council, and you remember we got rid of the senior rec facility, and the seniors used to be able to meet. So that was truly intended to be a community room that seniors can meet there and play cards, then quote cards or whatever they want to do. And it never happened because COVID happened, but it was intended to be a community room. So I think we're overthinking it. And I'm hesitant to have meetings in Westinghouse Lodge because we have to pay for cleaning and all that stuff. It should be just, if someone like a board has a meeting with, I don't know, 20 people or so, they should be able to meet there. There's no harm for anyone to open up that room. And no cost involved either.
You have to pay for this room, whatever you call it there, the overflow room, the meeting room. We have to pay for that to be cleaned as well.
Can I make a?
Yes, please.
Mike.
You, Mr. DeCrosta.
Thank you, Mr. DeCosta. I might sing a song too. A couple of thoughts. So one, I was on a member of council at the time when we were clubbing through the concept of creating this new space and the intended purpose of the community room. So just a couple of thoughts on that. Part of the process involved actually soliciting feedback from residents as part of the process because we were spending a significant amount of money to build the space. And we felt that it was only appropriate to solicit their feedback as part of that process. The community room was intended as a communal space for people to meet in. And it was intended for the use of people from a context standpoint. The intended plan was to eventually sell the building that we previously owned along with the senior center, which was at the time on it still is on Avenue D. And we just recently completed that sale after a couple of years process. We were allowing the seniors at that point to meet in that space, even though it was not a quote unquote senior center officially, right? The senior center had been moved to the Turtle Creek facility, but there was a group of seniors at the time who wanted to use the space for like getting together, playing cards, coffee, whatever. So one of the intended purposes of that room was to have a space for like seniors and basically anybody from the community who wanted to kind of get together and have a meeting space to have that. In my mind, and this is where I maybe have to ask Mr. Corbel a little bit about it from his sense of expertise. There is, I think, two purposes for that meeting space. One would be for the actual quote unquote betterment of the community or of the borough, right? So garden club would be an example, right? Environmental Advisory Committee would be another, right? Not saying that they've requested that, but these are committees that formed and basically serve for the betterment of the borough. So I kind of classify that as one group, right? And then I would say that the next one would be more of like a quote unquote, I don't know, for lack of a better term, a private use, right? So let's say an educational seminar. A group of people interested in maybe bringing a business to the borough would like to have a meeting with us to discuss that, right? Outside of like the normal confines of a regularly scheduled business meeting or committee meeting, but would actually like to just kind of have a meeting with, say, the borough manager. They want to bring representatives from their concern to discuss it, right? That was what I would kind of consider or label that like a private concern. So I'm wondering if we can't, so the private concerns I think would be, let me take a step backwards, sorry, because I'm thinking about this in real time. So betterment of the borough, I think we should we can define that, right, in a policy. And with the help of our solicitor, kind of create a list of, okay, what are the committee groups that would be kind of under this umbrella of for the betterment of the borough? And then I think for private use meetings, that would be, we would probably have to designate that as for either the approval of council or the approval of the borough manager to kind of say, yeah, you can meet here, or no, you really can't meet here, right? And kind of give that to one person. I would recommend you just give it to the borough manager to make that decision, maybe with some guidance from council if there's like a real gray area. So, I mean, I'm throwing those kind of options out there just to consider that. This is not going to be solved in one meeting. This is going to be an iterative process. I'm just trying to throw out maybe just some thoughts in terms of a framework for what is an intended use for this space and what shouldn't be an intended use for that space. I'm not sure if Steve has not to put you on the spot, but not sure if that makes sense or not, or.
Sorry. Like I said, it's all, the devil is going to be in the details of how we put that together. So, don't like words like the betterment of the borough, but you know, a community service organization.
That's a common terminology.
So maybe we could use something like that, but.
But the intended purpose is that, right?
Correct.
Doesn't have to be that specific.
We have to define that, right? And there may be people who think they're bettering the borough and you may disagree.
Right.
Or serving service organization, that they may be serving the borough and in some fashion that you disagree with. So that's all. I mean, that's something that you have to accept given some of those definitions versus something that might be more narrowly tailored. So
Before I get to Mr. DeCroix, oh, I'm sorry, were you finished?
I was just going to top off what it's complex. It requires a lot of unpacking. And again, I think this is going to be an iterative process. It's not going to get solved, let's say, by the July meeting per se, because there's going to be some discussion and debate on this. I think anyways. I mean, it's just my opinion, but I'm just throwing out some options just from a starting point is all. Sorry. Thank you.
Before Mr. DeCroix, I saw Mr. Lawrence, did you have your hand up?
No, I'll wait. Thank you.
Mr. DeCroix.
So maybe this is something that Mr. Corbel can address, but I keep on hearing that the issue that's before us now, the Democratic committee meeting here, if we had a Republican committee, if there were a Libertarian, Green Party, whatever group it may be, are political organizations that are that officials are elected into their positions. That's a very different organization for me than it is, say, a community service organization. So it fits more closely into the kind of business we're doing here in council chambers and in the community room than it does, say, for the garden club or the Boy Scouts. Although I'd still want to support them in different ways. I feel like this is a third category that we could introduce to the conversation and the new policy, because there is this spirit of community participation and election as part of it. Any opinion on that, Mr. Corvo?
Yes, you can do that, but once you invite those types of organizations, then any other political organization would fall under the umbrella. You can't choose a particular party, a particular left or right or center.
Right.
Once you say it, it goes in. And so there are a lot of political parties out there. So under my example that I suggested was using the terminology elected. Because right now, there is a mechanism for the Democratic Party to have elected committee members. There is an existing process for the Republican Party to have elected representatives. I do not know, I'm not going to opine as to whether other minor parties, et cetera, have that same, right? So that's something that we would have to look at to make sure that we're not creating an issue there.
Right.
But I don't think so, but we would just have to confirm that. But that also protects the borough from potentially opening the doors to a group that you may not want to use it. Or maybe you don't care. I don't know. I'm sort of being,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sort of trying to, my job is oftentimes to think of the worst thing that could happen. So a real fun way to go through life. But, you know, you think about the worst group that you could think of.
That may have elected officials.
And then think of something worse. They could come for a meeting perhaps, depending on how we define it. So again, devil's in the details. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to help you avoid the unintended consequences of such a policy. So
Thanks.
I have one comment. So what happened in these situations where I had to tell the person that wanted the small conference room, I agree with the manager, then this person didn't like that and made a point of berating the staff. So whatever we decide, everybody has to be in agreement with. So they're not calling the staff later and berating them. They don't deserve that. Just because you heard something you don't like, it's not a reason to treat people that way. Mr. Bacon?
Thank you. Right. First, I want to say I agree with the standpoint of using that elected official qualifier as a clear means to include usage of the room or whatever that facility is. I think it's clearly defined. And I think looking at some sort of slippery slope of, you know, the brain slug party or something taking over is like, I don't think we need to worry about that. At least for the time being. What I want to consider stepping back from this a little bit is just to think about labels. And we've been talking about the community room label, the history of that, how that all came about. And I just like to point out that we don't need to be stuck to that terminology or the origin or anything. We can always make something that is better fitting for the time being, despite however the building was designed, labeled, and the intentions behind it. That said, I think we should consider that this building is basically our modern town hall. And if we think of the words town hall, we have that as a gathering place, a place for elected officials to hold town halls and disseminate information. I think that community room has been used to that point very effectively by our US Congress representative, by our state reps at various times. I think it's a very good, solid use of that room, and we should encourage that with whatever the policy is. And I think that if we were to do the same thing, like the pool lodge and the Westinghouse Lodge for that type of event outside of just needing more space, kind of diminishes the centrality of this building and what it means to the community. I would also like to point out that if we push some of those committees and other groups to the Westinghouse Lodge or Pool Lodge, those are rental spaces, I think, effectively by definition, and we can potentially lose out on revenue and things that we would gain by those being available on a more regular basis. So I think using the community room, where basically every borough service committee and thing involved really just would centralize that, make an established meeting place, and really cement that as sort of the center of our community as we're trying to build up this campus of the area up here. And I would also argue that the community room is a rental space, considering it does have a kitchen and it is fully self-sustaining, and we have plenty of events there that are much more than just an expansion of the council chambers. So I really think we should consider it a valuable resource to the borough and try and encourage its usage basically whenever possible for any sort of community service. And that's my general stance on that. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience.
No, that's okay. I wanted to come in late. I think the one thing we have to get back to, whatever decisions were made when the building was built or in 2018, that policy is flawed. Not anyone's ill intention, but the end result, as Mr. Corbel has pointed out to us tonight, that there's flaws in that. And that's why this whole thing is being discussed now. I believe, Mr. Corbel, you can probably explain this or perhaps come back with a more tightly proposed policy. I think one of the options you have pretty nicely threads the needle of allowing groups like the Forest Hills Democratic Committee, who are elected officials, and perhaps Republican or other ones who are elected officials in a formal sense. If we define the room as being used by the council, all the organizations such as the advisory councils that we have created, and any activities those committees want to conduct under the auspices of the council and other elected officials, I think we open the door to meet a lot of the demands that are out there without getting ourselves into the issue of making judgments about subjective terms about groups that do or do not benefit the community. That, I think, is a rabbit hole. But I think, Mr. Corbel, you may have threaded the needle on that with one proposed policy. Could you outline that for the group?
I mean, that was my attempt to do so. And remember, this is an issue because the room is being provided at no charge. That makes it a problem. If it was for rent, as Mr. Bacon suggests, right, considering it a rental room, this isn't an issue because anybody can walk in, sign up for the time, pay the money, and be done. So, and I understand why we're talking, but I just wanted to make sure that was a clear point. Another way to consider this item, to address this item. So, but I think what Mr. Lawrence is saying is that was my effort to try and thread the needle, if you will, without getting into the slippery slope of community service organization. There probably are pretty good definitions out there. I know I've read some in the past. I know Mr. Abrams has some language, you know, but the more you add, the larger the door is open for, you know, Seth is going to be coming to the group or calling me and saying, does this qualify? But, you know, again, that was my attempt to try and think of a way that addresses the issue at hand, and puts maybe perhaps the other issue for later discussion, but something that we could move on more quickly to address the concerns and then work towards the broader policy, perhaps in the medium term versus the near or long term.
Mr. Lawrence, do you have any other comments?
Yes, I would like to encourage us maybe take that step, encourage Mr. Corbel to refine that approach that can get us through the toughest waters we're dealing with now. And then we can leave the broader question to be discussed in the future more slowly. I will say that one of the things that is flawed about the present policy, and it comes up, and I don't want to pick on any particular example, but if we use the term benefiting the community, that does take us down a tough road, because then we have to say what benefits the community. And I could give you an simple example. I think we could find a significant portion of our community who would have thought having Pride people meet at our building was not benefiting a community. So you could quickly go down a bad road. So I think that's why we have to be so careful with those, what do become subjective terms in evaluating whether a particular group is valid for meeting in those rooms. But I suspect we can perhaps break these two pieces apart. And if we go down one tighter road for next week, or next time we meet with Mr. Corbel presenting a tight explanation of that, we can at least go down, get that taken care of, and then have time to really think about the broader road we want to take. Thank you.
Mr. Erbaldinger, is your hand up?
Yes, I think
Thank you.
some council members probably want to be more tighter. Some other council members want to be more broader. How about if we ask Mr. Corbel to come up with two policies, one a little bit more restrictive and one a little bit more open to all those other community groups which we mentioned before. I don't want to reiterate them. So we have two policies to look at.
I think we can do it in one. I don't, if we start going into two, now it's coming even more complicated.
Well, and it seems to me as if the tighter the language, the better it is for everybody. So to go into a general policy is just, it's not going to resolve our situation now.
Mr. Bacon?
Is this something where maybe we could treat it sort of as almost options of like each step is the next bigger rather than just kind of two extremes, like just from this is from Mr. Corbel, from a just structure of the document and statement perspective, would that be worth?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And you can have a policy that you adopt, and let's just say, next week. Probably that's not reasonable, I don't think,
No.
but
No.
let's just say that this is something that perhaps comes to the committees in August, and maybe you vote in August on approving a policy. If it is the narrowly tailored scope that's on the books, you continue to talk about the other policies, decide where you want to go. Then the policy is amended again a month or two later, and you can build on it. You can scrap what you had if you're going to define things in different ways. Right? So I think I would probably pull the elected officials out of any definition around to Mr. Abrams' point about the community service organizations. Like, I would not include that. And I think that's what you were talking about, Joe. Like, that's fine. If we need to work on that and figure that out and see what that looks like, that's great. But I think everybody can probably get together on at least the elected officials language, and we may as well put something together to look at while we're working on the other, trying to figure out where everybody is. Other definitions as it may relate.
Well, we've mentioned the manager having the decision. Let's let him say something tonight, okay, guys?
Thank you, Madam President. To council, and with no offense to the members of the Democratic Committee who are here, I'm asking, as you're thinking about it and looking at the practicality, that you really focus on what does council want the community room or the room over there, however you want to define it, how do you want it to be used? What's your vision of how it's used? And then let Mr. Corbel, myself, delve into the semantics of what it is. Do we view it as a fully open room? Do we view it as becoming a rental room for some nominal fee? Do you want to see it strictly used for borough business, such as when other committees of council? and look at the overall, because the decision that was made and even the way it was written, it was not targeted, at least in my mind, and I wasn't here when it was first being written, but I will also state for the members of the audience, I am a firm believer in a building like this where the space is free, that it is a nonpartisan building other than the business that happens behind the dais. So my take on this is that no party should be meeting in here, but whatever council decides is what I will follow. And I think they may have come at it from a different angle, but that's my feeling. So whatever council's vision is, if you can define that, I think that we can come up with language that will meet that, as opposed to trying to really dive in and say, well, this group is in, the Boy Scouts are in because the Eagle Scouts do projects for us, but the Girl Scouts are out because they don't have a similar community service project. Or
They do, that's called the Gold Star.
okay. I've in my career as a manager, I've had Boy Scouts come and present Eagle projects. I've not had a Girl Scout present a Gold Star project for the municipality. So I apologize to any Girl Scouts who are listening. But that if you can find that greater mission or vision for the room, we can then craft some language to hopefully meet council's overall, without getting into each tiny item here.
Mr. Bacon.
Just for everyone's clarification, could Mr. Corbel or maybe Mr. Abrams just explain the ramifications of changing a policy, and just that I'm presuming it's really not a big deal. There's no huge, posting cost or term that it's locked into. It's something that is an updated, living, easily changeable document, correct?
You can vote on a policy simply by motion. Some places like to adopt it by resolution, which there is no advertising requirement. So you could change it at every meeting if you like.
Excuse me. This is Mr. Watkins speaking. I'm sorry, I can't put my hand up. I've pressed every button on my phone and it's not working. I felt it was really important for everyone who may have been offended by this to understand that our purpose was not to exclude you. Our purpose was to come up with a policy that prevents the borough from being sued. There's no sense in losing $10, $20, $30, $40,000 or more in a lawsuit just because someone feels that they're entitled to use the room and they got denied. So I hope you appreciate that. That was our intent, not to try to harm, punish, or cause problems for any of the groups that have benefited the borough.
We can't take public comment at this time. Well, have we talked this out enough? We haven't come up with anything. Wait, Mr. Lawrence, it's your committee. Your hand is up.
Sure. I propose that we have some sort of agreement that Mr. Corbel will draft a relatively narrow policy that will get us out of the deep waters we're in right now, cover up get rid of the mistakes we made with the present policy, get that reviewed by council in the next month, and then address the deeper issues as we have time.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. DeCrosta,
I would support that.
other comments?
I'm curious if we are in favor enough of assuming that we will have elected positions that would include the Democratic Committee, if we're confident that we would include that in the new policy to the point where we could at this or the next business meeting vote to just include them, include elected officials in the next.
We have to talk this out. If we haven't come to anything tonight, I can't imagine that we would. I mean, I didn't hear any clear decision. Anyone? Any council member?
I feel like we need to hash all of this out first and really understand what our categories are going to be, if anything, and then make a decision from there. I don't want to jump the gun, so to speak.
Mr. Bioki, your hand is up.
Yeah, likewise, we agreed that we'd have Mr. Corbel take a look at it and provide us some additional information. And I think that's the way we should proceed.
I agree with that as well. Does anyone else have any comment on that? I'm sorry, public comment is over. Okay, then we're going to move on. Anything for the Environmental Advisory Council? The Tree and Shrub Committee?
There is a list of borough recommended trees that they're working on, and I believe at the meeting tomorrow should be finalizing that.
It's the Tree and Shrub Committee, correct?
Correct.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so if there's nothing else, that ends this meeting. Thank you.
I have a question. Are we going to have an executive session? I couldn't hear.